Hello, and welcome to the Tea Leaves podcast, where our goal is to bring Asia to you through conversations with the people whose lives and work are shaping the Indo-Pacific region. I'm Rexon Yu, managing partner at the Asia Group. My co-host, Bloomberg TV's Sherry An, is off this week and will return in our next episode. This conversation will feature a special guest co-host towards the end from the Asia Group team, so be sure to stick around for our whole conversation. I'm really pleased today to welcome to Tea Leaves Representative Bi-khim Hsiao, who leads the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office in Washington, D.C. Representative Hsiao has been in her current position as Taiwan's top representative to the United States since July 2020, arriving during the pandemic. Prior to that, she was a senior advisor to the current Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen at the National Security Council in Taipei. She has also served 4 terms in Taiwan's legislature, the Legislative Yuan, or LY, where she was, among other things, the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. Bi-khim was born in Japan and also holds 2 degrees from Oberlin and Columbia University. Representative Hsiao, thank you so much for joining us today. It is a real pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you, Rexon, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to share some of our views.
Bi-khim, I wanted to start with a late-breaking news event here related to COVID. Taiwan has been at the forefront in combating COVID, and a huge amount of credit is deserved for President Tsai, for you and the entire team. Just recently, both the United States and Japan have announced new measures to reopen in some respects, to ease quarantine requirements for travelers coming into each of these countries. I wanted to just get your sense off the bat. What is the outlook in Taiwan regarding COVID, and what kinds of criteria thresholds do you think are being applied as Taipei considers how and when to reopen?
Well, this is a very important and relevant question that involves the normalization of global travel and interaction. Within Taiwan, over the past month, we have managed to bring COVID back under control with very few cases over the past couple of weeks. Our society has become more comfortable with a COVID-free environment, with most economic activities and social activities resuming in a normal sense. In fact, over the last year and a half since the outbreak of COVID, except for a very painful surge during May and June of this past year, we've mostly kept COVID under control. Now, this brings about the next challenge, and that is part of our control measures have involved very restrictive quarantine regulations, and which means that Taiwan has comfortably been living within our own bubble, keeping our economy and our schools open. But re-engaging with the world, of course, has many opportunities, but it also brings about risks of breakthrough cases within our society. I think our society actually has a relatively low tolerance for any breakthrough cases. And so the government tends to be a bit more cautious about reopening borders without the quarantine as a buffer between the outside world and our society. So in the foreseeable future, I expect the quarantine to remain in place. However, the government is gradually relaxing part of the travel regulations, including some special diplomatic bubbles for essential political and governmental interaction. Over the Lunar New Year holiday, where we expect large numbers of Taiwanese to come back home to be with their families, also a shortened quarantine period for those who have been fully vaccinated. I think another factor that will affect our quarantine rule is the domestic vaccination rate.
Mhm.
We had some initial difficulties in and political obstacles in the contracts of for our foreign acquisitions of vaccines. But thanks to the United States and Japan for very generous donations, plus now the gradual arrival of the vaccines we have purchased. We have reached 70% in the first dose, and we're at about 30% now for the second dose.
Mhm.
And once we can cover more fully vaccinated members of our population with the second dose, I think our society would also gain a greater degree of confidence in our ability to reopen borders without that quarantine buffer. So that's a long answer to your short question, but we intend to continue to try to keep COVID under control and keep our economy open and running, which is essential for the global supply chain, especially in the technology sector. Number two, we are gradually relaxing those quarantine rules, but in a step by step approach, and has to be consistent with our ability to um, fully vaccinate a larger portion of our population.
And is Taiwan more comfortable now with the flow of vaccine? I mean, you mentioned some uneasiness, some difficulties, political challenges. Japan and the United States have stepped up. I think other countries did
Mhm.
too, but I just wanted to pause on that piece. That the outlook is more stable now and assured.
Mhm. Yes. Well, with the combination of the donations from the United States, Japan, and in Europe, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Lithuania, and
Hmm.
Poland have also made generous donations to Taiwan. With the combination of those, plus the vaccines that we have contracted or purchased, that were with due to all kinds of reasons and supply chain disruptions, of course, but only really delivering at a better pace around now, the third and fourth quarter of the year. I think we can expect by the end of the year a more comfortable rate of vaccine access and also a vaccination.
That's terrific. I will say, speaking for myself, I look forward to visiting Taipei in the near future. Like many, we've all been grounded from international travel, and it feels like ages ago where we've been able to get out. So I'm very hopeful, looking forward to that day. Um, Representative Hsiao, you arrived a little more than a year ago during the pandemic. It was also a period where we've seen some interesting and very encouraging changes, both made by the prior administration, the Trump administration, and followed up by the Biden team with respect to how you and your team interact with the U.S. government, with some restrictions lifted to enable you to engage more directly. Can you just talk a little bit about what it looked like before and what it looks like today, for you as you want to engage and work through a variety of issues: defense, trade, public health, COVID, with different officials within the U.S. government?
Well, COVID has been a challenge, of course,
Yeah.
for any sector or anyone, any country, in terms of engaging. But despite that, the relationship between Taiwan and the United States is just so critically important right now, not only from Taiwan's perspective, but also from the U.S. perspective in terms of Indo-Pacific stability and economic supply chain issues, etc. So we have sought to maintain a very close and engaging partnership over this past period of time, despite the disruptions of COVID. And I very much appreciate that the willingness from my American counterparts to engage with us has been very forthcoming. It's been very proactive and been consistent across the two administrations with whom I've engaged. And I think the interest in working out a number of issues with Taiwan is there. we do appreciate that the formerly known contact guidelines have
Hmm.
been reviewed, and that was a mandate by Congress, actually, through the Taiwan Assurance Act, which requested a review of those contact guidelines to better reflect the depth and the breadth of our partnership. And with that review, which crossed over to the two administrations, we are pleased that there are more opportunities to engage directly with fewer restrictions, and the revised contact guidelines is actually done in the spirit of encouraging a broader and more interaction, and so again that is welcomed. In addition to my own interaction and engagement with many counterparts here in Washington, on a global level, Taiwanese representatives in other parts of the world have also been engaging with their American counterparts in
Mm-hmm.
dealing with global issues. For example, as we speak, the COP26 is taking place, and even though Taiwan remains marginalized, excluded from any UN related institutional activities, but on the sidelines of that, the United States has been extremely supportive of our engagement with other countries. And so we can have side events. We're co-sponsoring GCTF activities.
And GCTF, just to interrupt, is a COVID related or entity, right?
GCTF, it's called the Global Cooperation and Training Framework, which
Yeah.
was also mandated by Congress. It
Hmm.
initiated as a bilateral platform between Taiwan and the United States to help facilitate Taiwan's global engagement
Yes.
on multiple issues. Now that partnership has expanded to include Japan as a formal partner, and depending on an issue by issue basis, we've also involved Australia, the United Kingdom, Sweden, some other countries around the world. So we appreciate these expanding partnerships
Hmm.
to engage on multiple issues that are relevant to the world. As I said, the climate issues is one, healthcare issues, um, disinformation challenges, human rights, economic um, sustainable development issues, supply chain issues. All of these have been addressed through various GCTF platforms around the world, and that's an important part of the U.S.-Taiwan engagement, and that's not only in our Taiwan-U.S. context of the issues of immediate importance, but also expanding out into the global issues and finding
Hmm.
ways where we can cooperate in other parts of the world.
I want to pick up on your comments regarding the economic relationship and technology, and you've mentioned, supply chain integrity and ways that we can work together. Taiwan has been in the news a bit lately, largely focused on defense and security issues with the kinds of aggressive actions taken by Chinese military forces in the Taiwan Strait and around Taiwan. But I want to focus on the economic and trade dimensions for a minute first, Bi-khim, and ask you. There have been recent developments bilaterally with the United States and Taiwan to advance trade talks. There's also hope regionally around new initiatives in the digital economy space. But on the bilateral front, what are you hoping to see unfold over the next year or two between the United States and Taiwan?
Well, we've made a lot of progress in our bilateral economic and trade partnership. Notably, this past June, the resumption of TIFA talks, which
Mm-hmm.
is the most important trade discussion platform between us that had been suspended for the previous 5 years, and so that helps us get it gets the bilateral trade momentum going. And we've followed up with the TIFA council meetings by a lot of working group issues tackling a variety of issues. And so I think there is some positive momentum there. A second notable platform is the Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue that was initiated also last year and been carried on by the current administration. We expect to have another set of discussions soon. And this dialogue incorporates a number of important areas, including supply chain security, science and technology, 5G and trusted networks, and the supply chain needed to facilitate that. It includes investment screening issues, CFIUS related investment screening issues. The dialogue also incorporated investments and market opportunities for global infrastructure projects. And so it covers a very large
Yeah.
variety of economically important issues. This year, we hope to expand that discussion to also address the digital trade issue that you just mentioned. Taiwan does seek to further integrate our economy from a regional level as well as global level in other partnerships, and digital trade is certainly one venue we would like to consider. There's the regional trading network, the CPTPP. We have submitted an application
Mm-hmm.
to join. But in addition to that, we're also pursuing bilateral trade opportunities. I think that a longer term goal with the United States would also be able to, for us to be able to enter into a bilateral trade agreement, such in the form that the Koreans and Japanese also
Mm-hmm.
have with the United States. And over the last year, Taiwan was the ninth largest trading partner of the United States. And so, I think the volume and quality and of the trade between us are just so, it's very much mutually complementary as well, and significant enough that this is something worth pursuing.
It's a striking fact you just mentioned that Taiwan is ninth largest trading partner of the United States. I'm sure many people don't appreciate that. Um, you mentioned the sort of successor to the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, the CPTPP, and Taiwan has applied. I'm curious as I look at regional trade prospects from an American perspective. I see a lot of focus, as you and I have just mentioned, on the digital economy and this partnership that now exists among Singapore, Chile, and New Zealand, the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement. And interestingly, those three countries were sort of ground zero for launching TPP 15, 16 years ago. Is Taiwan looking at joining the Digital Economy Agreement?
Well, we are, examining the parameters of that,
Mm-hmm.
and also engaging with other stakeholders to see what other types of arrangements might be out there. But I think the fundamental interest of Taiwan is to be more internationally engaged. We are, after all, a very important trading partner for the region, and so we do. Intend to be more engaged on multiple fronts, including digital trade.
Shifting gears slightly, Ambassador, pressures, threats from China, kind of almost a daily occurrence, not almost, pretty much a daily occurrence for Taiwan. And looking a little more broadly, growing concerns around foreign interference. We've had that's been a presence here in the United States now for a number of political cycles. We saw it in Australia emerge when it came to certain activities by China. Can you talk a little bit about sort of domestic politics in Taiwan and how you see the question of foreign interference, foreign influence, particularly from China?
Well, China's political influence operations have been very intense in Taiwan, and it takes place on multiple fronts,
Hmm.
very much in the form of disinformation, but also the manipulation of open social media platforms to disseminate that disinformation. And as you know, Taiwan, like the United States, is a very open society where free speech and public discussion is very much open. And so, um, the Chinese tend to manipulate that very open space. And so we have tried to respond by increasing domestic media literacy campaigns and trying
Hmm.
to um, alert the public that all the information that you see online and around has to be questioned with a rational and scientific and a democratic perspective. But that is one aspect. Another aspect is the use of economic leverage to
Mm.
coerce sectors of society, and that is also something that not only Taiwan but Australia obviously and some other countries are also facing. So we this is a bigger and more complicated challenge, and so it's important that we work with other countries to find those tools to counter that economic coercion. We noticed that in the EU, they are deliberating um, a toolbox to help their member states counter such economic coercion.
Hmm.
In the United States, there's also been a bipartisan legislative initiative aimed at supporting or allocating more attention in the area of countering economic coercion. And so I think it's an effort that requires collective action. No single country can deal with it alone, given the size and scope of the Chinese market and their um, very sophisticated use of tools of manipulating and using economic leverage to coerce other countries. So this is an ongoing challenge, and we will continue to address them, hopefully with the support of other friends and partners, especially the democratic and open societies that also respect market rules.
Thanks. Sobering to hear your description. It certainly feels like this set of challenges will only grow as political cycles, continue in your country and ours and elsewhere around the world. I know we're running a little short on time. I did want to touch on kind of the geopolitical and security dimension for Taiwan and ask you this question, Bi-khim, and that is, I think one of the most significant developments over the last 12 to 18 months has been the prospect for deeper, closer collaboration and relations between Taiwan and Japan. And I would like to hear your sort of assessment of kind of where they are today, particularly now that we have a new prime minister in Tokyo, Prime Minister Kishida, a defense minister who has taken a personal interest in Tokyo to Japan Taiwan relations, and what you see in the near to medium term for Taiwan's relations with Japan.
Well, first, on the very top level, we appreciate that President Biden has engaged Japan and other like minded partners around the world, including Australia, NATO, G7,
Hmm.
in underscoring the importance of peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. I think there is increasing awareness that the security of Taiwan and stability in the Indo Pacific region are very critical components of global interest. And so other stakeholders are also underscoring the importance of that um, aspect. Japan, in particular, given its geostrategic interests as well as its location, has an interest in the continuing stability and maintaining the status quo of the Taiwan Strait. So on the summit level, there have been some joint statements of interest. Of course, Japan is an ally of the United States, and security interests are also closely linked through that alliance framework. Now, the second level down involves the people and public
Mm-hmm.
sentiment. And the people of Taiwan and the people of Japan have developed a very close emotional and sentimental friendship. And in Taiwan, we often call it a virtuous cycle of helping each other, of
Mm-hmm.
kindness. And when Japan had, faced the crisis of the Fukushima, the nuclear reactor and tsunami, and the people of Taiwan most generously were the largest foreign donors of humanitarian support. And the Japanese have tried to repay that generosity over many years, including the most recent vaccine donation. But
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying is this has evolved into kind of a people to people friendship and fondness, including before COVID days, a lot of travel and tourism and cultural, economic ties and trust between the two peoples. And so I think that forms a very important foundation. There's a kind of a common understanding that security of the region is important for all of us. And so the Japanese have also taken an interest in being supportive of Taiwan. And then there's the other dimension, of course, on the economic security side, where Japan, like the rest of the world, has felt deeply the disruptions of that COVID has presented on global supply chains, and they are actively engaging with Taiwan in terms of the technology,
Mm.
semiconductor sector, and how we can work together. Japan's always been a technology powerhouse, and that added to Taiwan's manufacturing capabilities and advantages. There are many opportunities for partnering together, and so that interest takes place on multiple levels. But ultimately on the security side, it's clear that any disruption of um, or breach of the security in the Taiwan Strait will have enormous consequences of other neighboring stakeholders. And so it's only natural that other stakeholders should also take an interest in ensuring that conflict doesn't take place, in working together to deter any contemplation of a military action that would disrupt the peace and stability of the region.
No, thanks, Bi-khim. I think it's that's a very comprehensive laydown of gives hopefully our listeners a very much more textured understanding beneath the surface of relations between the two neighbors. So we're coming close to time, and as we wrap up, I wanted to ask Morgan to join us. I'm pleased to have her join this episode of Tea Leaves. Morgan has been with the Asia Group for about a year and a half, and she has just a super interesting background. Mother is Taiwanese, father is French. She speaks Mandarin and Arabic. Already a number of different interesting positions since finishing up school. TV broadcasting in London, a bartender in Taiwan, and a bookseller in Paris. But I wanted to ask Morgan to join. She wanted to raise a couple questions with you, Ambassador, that might be a little bit more on the personal side for you to reflect on. Morgan.
Thank you, Rexon, and thank you, Ambassador Hsiao, for joining our podcast today. I wanted to ask you a few questions about your experience bridging cultures and generations. How would you say your international and multicultural upbringing across Taiwan and the United States has influenced your perspective, your career choices, and decision to get involved in Taiwanese politics? And how did that perspective impact your style of political leadership?
In short, my upbringing, my family background, and my experience of living in different societies and cultures, I think, helped develop a ability to engage cross culturally, and I think that's been very helpful in in my position now as being a bridge between Taiwan and the United States and finding those opportunities for engagement. But I think another important aspect is I happened to come of age during a time of rapid change in Taiwan. And that was the democratization. Taiwan ended martial law in 1987, and we had our first election, a general election for the legislature in 1992, and then first ever presidential election in 96. And that happened to be a time where, intellectually and politically, I was developing my own ideas about politics. And I think it had two important impacts. And one is that, the I came to realize how unfair the world was treating Taiwan. We feel always that we have the ability and we're eager to contribute and be part of the global community, and yet the world marginalizes Taiwan from the United Nations. The world suppresses Taiwan's international participation space, and it seems that. Until recently, there was a lot of silence in response to Chinese bullying against Taiwan's global participation. So that really got me fired up as a young person, and I felt that I should do more to expand Taiwan's international space. And I think the second impact would be the fact that, as I said, Taiwan was democratizing, and it was a moment of tremendous change in Taiwan. We were having our first ever presidential election, and yet the Chinese were firing missiles at us. And, apparently every struggle we were making to make advances in our democracy also meant that we would counter even more difficult challenges coming from across the strait in the PRC. And so the challenges just continue, but I'm just so proud that Taiwan has developed into a very resilient society. And despite all the difficulties and challenges, Taiwan has also become one of the most progressive and diverse societies of Asia. And we seek to protect and defend those basic rights that have not come about easily. The basic freedoms and the democracy that we have today. And I happen to come of age during all of this happening. And so I think it's further hardened my commitment and my sense of mission that, maximizing the global opportunities that we have, the support from friends and democracies around the world, while also working hard to minimize those threats to our democracy is really a lifelong mission of mine up until now. And I appreciate all the support that's been given to us, but at the same time, the challenges and the hurdles have also made us tougher than ever. And I think that's why the Taiwanese have really become very resilient as well.
Thanks, Morgan. I have to ask, Representative Hsiao, will you run for office again in the future?
That's not in the planning. Been there, done that.
Oh, well, Ambassador Hsiao, thank you so much for vibrant, rich conversation. Simply terrific. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Rexon, and thank you, Morgan. I do, again, appreciate this opportunity to engage with your listeners. And I hope to have a chance to meet you in person sometime, Morgan. This partnership with Asia Group is very meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to our listeners. Please be sure to rate and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also access the full video of our conversation on YouTube and at theasiagroup.com. We'll see you next time on Tea Leaves.